Hey guys, this is an example of JavaScript, a canvas-based game, and it's something I've been working on for about 4 weeks, and this is what I have. In this tutorial, I'm going to use all of what I learned about making games with Canvas, and this is going to be a very simple tutorial that demonstrates how to set up the canvas. We're not going to go into details of actually making a game like this, but eventually as we progress toward the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to draw sprites, how to draw lines, how to capture input for your game character, and things like that. So this is just a preview of what's possible with Canvas. So maybe, hopefully, somebody will find it inspiring. And I'm basically including it here because I wanted to give someone some hope. I wanted to show you guys that if you take this seriously, that at least, because if I could do this, then someone else could do a very similar game or even better. And if I show it to set up Canvas, how to draw all these things, how to draw the world, how to animate characters, maybe someone will actually learn to make HTML5 games. So I'm going to start the tutorial now. So I'm going to switch off the game and I'm going to start with really basic stuff. So let's get started. This is tutorial number 1. Hey guys, this is the first tutorial in which I'm going to start a new series, and we're going to start making video games with JavaScript and HTML5. I chose this medium in particular rather than installing C++ or Java IDE on your desktop computer, because it's so much easier to just log into JSFiddle.net. And it's such a great way to teach these concepts and show the result right away. By just going to that link, you'll see the source code that you can copy and paste and basically actually see the game working. So I'm going to start by creating the canvas tag. I'm going to go into HTML view on JSFiddle, and it's a new tag in HTML5. It's called canvas, and I usually give it an ID canvas, the same thing, canvas. And just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to add some style to it. But the way Canvas operates is it basically has two width and height properties, and it's really confusing sometimes when you just start it out, because putting different values into these different parameters will kind of stretch the sprites, and they will no longer be pixel perfect. You will see some blurriness. They will become a little blurry if you mismatch these parameters. So let's create a canvas with width, let's say maybe 640, height 480. It's a really old resolution for old games. Back in the old days where we had 240 by 480 by 240 and stuff like that. So here we define the canvas. Let's run this example, and nothing's going to appear yet. So let's add some style to it. Let's add a border so we can visually see it on the screen. Let's see here. It appeared right here. So this is 640 by 480. And the interesting thing, you can add width 640 here again, height, and that's what I was talking about. If you change this 640 and this 480, or these ones, the sprites will start to kind of stretch, and they will no longer be, 1-to-1 ratio. But that can be only demonstrated visually, so I'm just going to leave this like this. We matched 640 and 640 here. This width and height can have different effects. That's part of what I'm trying to explain. If you change 640 to something that's not 640 here, again, it's going to create some sprite stretching effects. And I'll demonstrate that later on. But so we created canvas. And now we need to go into JavaScript. I'm going to go into JSFiddle and add jQuery 1.11, an older version. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to start writing my first JavaScript code. As usual, as you know, you don't have to use jQuery to make games in HTML5, but it's definitely going to help you. So document ready function. This is basically telling us that once all HTML elements have finished loading, from that point on we start writing our code. So usually it's initialization, initialize sprites, load pictures, and stuff like that. So we have this really nice canvas here, but we don't really have a way to access anything on it. It's just a HTML tag. So in order to do this, we need to know a little about JavaScript's objects. And I could have created a context object using basic JavaScript functions, but I'm going to go one step farther and create a custom context object that I can use later on. This will allow me to add my own custom functionality to that context object. So basically, I'm going to create my own constructor and call it context. And that can be done like this. So this is a new variable context. And we're going to start adding things to it. This canvas. So we're adding a property canvas to the self-made object called context. And another one is going to need context itself. This is going to be the actual object, HTML5 object context that refers to the canvas. Canvas has a context and we need to enable it before we can start drawing anything on it. And in order to do that, we need to create it first. And we'll see how that can be done with by using the getContext function in HTML5. But for now, let's set it to null. So this canvas context object will need a function create. We can do it like... Actually, I made a really bad mistake here. Hey guys, it seems like I just made a mistake in the way I was explaining something, and every time that's going to happen in my tutorials, I decided to use that as an opportunity to explain what that mistake was and what's going on here. This will definitely help to understand JavaScript better, and I will learn from my mistakes as well. Instead of just saying I made a mistake, I'm going to the next subject, I don't think that anyone would learn anything from that. And so every time I make a mistake, I'm going to create this intermission on a black background, and that's how you would know that it's not part of the main tutorial, but it's sort of like an intermission. So anyway, this mistake I just made, I mixed up the function constructors with JavaScript object created using JSON notation. And here's the difference. Let's create object1. This is JSON notation, and basically you can start adding variables to it or properties. For example, colors 1 and size 150, just for example. And so this is a JSON object. It's correctly formatted. It's ready to start using in your program. So for example, object1 colors, you can start outputting this into console log or alert object1 colors or size. So when you create an object using a JSON notation, which is these brackets, and then you just keep adding properties or functions using a comma, for example, draw, it's a function. As you can see, we can mix properties that are just values and functions inside the same object. And here the this keyword will refer to colors or size. In other words, it will refer to its own scope. For example, colors will refer to colors value here, or this size will refer to this parameter here, size 150, inside this function. So the mistake that I made, I started thinking that I'm creating an object of type function, which is a constructor. So here you don't have to initialize JSON object. This is a plain JavaScript object. You basically already created it. You gave it a name. These are already properties that are stored and attached to it, so you can start using it. Another type of an object is a function object. Object2 assigned as a function. It can be used in a very similar way, but here we have to use this keyword to define colors to, for example, this size 150 equal, making the same mistake again, equal. So this object is really very similar to this object, and you can even add a draw function, which would be something like this. And the difference between these two is that this is not an initialized object yet. When you create an object using the function keyword, and as you know, in JavaScript, all functions are objects. So that's the link. When you create a function, you're really creating an object as well. It's just not represented using JSON notation, but it functions in the same exact way. But in order for that to happen, we need to first initialize it. So if we started calling object2 colors, this would produce an error because this would actually return undefined. But why is it returning undefined? Here, when we create an object using JSON, we could have used it right away and it worked perfectly. This would be 1, this would be 150. But here it would return undefined, and the reason for that is because this is a constructor object. In order to start using it, we first need to initialize it, create an instance of that object. So by itself, this is more like a blueprint for that object at this point. We can't use it. In order to initialize it, we go new object2 like this. So this initializes that object and creates an instance of this object. And here, instead of going directly to the constructor, now we can access it through the instance name that we just created here. And this will return 2 now that it's initialized. and size will return 150, and so on. So that's the mistake I was making, is that I started making an object of using JSON because I just wanted it to exist right away, so we don't have to initialize it. That would make things a little simpler for the canvas example. But I started assigning its properties using the this keyword like that, and that just, it doesn't work. It's going to create an error because these are fundamentally two different ways of adding properties. JSON uses the JSON format, the comma and colon, and the function constructors use this dot format. So while we're really doing the same thing, basically, here and here, objects of type function are considered constructors, and constructors need to be initialized first and assigned to an instance of an object, and only then they will work. So that was the mistake that I was making, and I just wanted to put it here. So hopefully it will be helpful to many of the readers here, viewers of my tutorials. So I think I'm ready to go back to the Canvas tutorial. I start creating a function constructor instead of an object. So I need to change these to columns and change the formatting a little. Sorry about that. That wouldn't work if we had equal signs. I mixed it up and started creating a function constructor instead of an object. This is supposed to be an object, so I'm changing it back to that. And let's see here. And I don't even need this. That's not gonna work. That's for function constructors. I can just type in the names right away. So I need to create a function called create, and this function will take canvas tag ID. Let's see here. So something like this. And this function, this is the core JavaScript. How in most cases how Canvas is created. We're just wrapping it into this nice little object that we can use later. And here in this function now, we can use the this keyword and say canvas equals document get element by ID, and we're going to use the canvas tag ID, copy and paste it in there, and this context. So we're basically taking these local parameters and we're setting them to something inside this function. Canvas. So now that we got canvas, we got it by using the getElementById function. Canvas tag ID was passed to it. So now we need to use this canvas variable property that we just created to grab its context. So this canvas tag ID is going to be the ID canvas. So it's this element. We're grabbing this element of this canvas, and now we're going to get its context. So this can be done by saying this canvas get context, and here we're going to say 2D. It could have been 3D, but we're making a two-dimensional demo here for now. And then this function needs to return this context. So we created this object, and now we're going to initialize it. And so now we can start to initialize our code. And because this is not a function constructor, we don't have to create a new object using the new keyword. We can start using it right away. Because this is the JSON format, we just typed in the context, the content of this object by hand in between brackets. So it already exists, all of these things. The context object already exists, so we can start calling its function create. And this really makes it so much simpler. This context create, and it tells you exactly what it does. It hides all of this code in here, and we need to pass the canvas tag ID. Now we're not using the hashtag here. We don't have to, because remember, get element by ID, it just gets the string. So this canvas here, that's the reference to canvas ID in HTML, the ID tag. And you just call create function, it runs these. This keyword inside a function, inside a JSON object, this will refer to these properties here. Using this keyword inside this function, it will just refer to these other properties in the same object. It's not referring to the function object. And the actual object, HTML5 context object, will be stored in this parameter. So we can access it as context. I know that's a little redundant probably, but as long as we keep in mind that this is the main context, custom context JavaScript object that we created, it's really fine. It is a little redundant, but it doesn't really matter. Sometimes you have to choose one style of programming for your project and stick to it. We could have created these variables as global variables and have them available through our entire JavaScript program, but it just, out of a habit, I start creating everything as objects, creating custom objects. When your project grows, that's when it becomes much more useful. You start using objects, and you'll definitely make your code much more readable if you use these. If you structure your code in this way. So now that we have created the context, let's do something with it. And for example, this is the handle now to this entire canvas from our JavaScript program, now that we created it. And let's maybe paint the background. This, the most basic thing you can do with a canvas is painting the background in a certain color. We're going to use the context that we created. Remember this parameter? Now it's actively attached to the canvas as a handle, so we can use it to access canvas. One of the first things before painting the background, we need to call beginPath. And it's kind of hard to explain what beginPath really does, because in this example it's not really going to make a difference, but that's only because we're drawing one thing on the screen. beginPath usually becomes more important when you have different shapes, for example lines, and then you draw rectangles, then you draw a circle or something, and for each one shape you need to reset the path. And that's what this function does, because otherwise if you don't call it, it's going to think that you're continuing to draw using the preferences that you set for the so-called path in the previous object. And sometimes you just want to start a completely new object with new properties that's not even part of the previous one. So you have to always clear the path. But because we're only clearing the background here in this example, it's not going to matter if it's there or not, but it's still a good idea to get in the habit of starting using it anyways. So to draw something, we use the function rectangle, and we're going to use the same 640 by 480 parameters. And context, fill style. Let's do black screen. Context, fill. And so you need all these three functions, three commands rather, three statements to draw something on the screen, to fill it in black color. Now here we set the dimensions of the black rectangle. Let's see what happens if I run the code. As you can see, it turned black. So we just painted the background black. And again, the begin path we don't really need it. As you may see, if I comment it out and I run it again, it's still painting. It's not really having any effects. But if, for example, in video games, there's a loop. You keep drawing things in a loop. So if you start drawing a line here and you assign red color and a certain thickness, and then that loop returns back here and we don't begin path again, it's going to think that we're just continuing to this drawing, the line drawing process. It's going to continue thinking we're still drawing the line. So that's why it's important to set to begin path each time we start drawing something new. It simply resets everything to draw a new shape. So this concludes this tutorial. We created canvas in HTML. We added the context object. We initialized some canvas and context properties with getContext. And this is the basic setup. And then we, in jQuery's, after everything is loaded up, we actually created the context, and we used that context to draw something on the canvas. So this is a really basic canvas tutorial. This is just a starting point, and within the next tutorials, I will show you how to draw sprites, how to animate characters, how to jump around, how to use the keyboard, to basically make a really simple game in HTML5. So I hope you guys like this tutorial, and I'll see you next time.